Back in June of this year, Wizards of the Coast gave some hints that they would be making some announcements about setting information in July. Now here, July 23-ish, we got that news, and we now have one new setting book, if you can call it that, and one they've announced that is coming in November. So we're gonna break down what we have, what is to come, and I'll be talking about my opinion on some of the rather interesting and unexpected choices they have made. Let's do it. My name is Nate, and this is WASD20. Thanks so much for joining me today, everybody. First, we're going to be talking about the new setting book that was announced because they announced that on Sunday night, and then we'll be talking about the new setting book that they just released and said, here, have this thing, sort of thing, on Monday, and it was all just a little bit perplexing, and I don't know, it's just something that I guess I didn't see coming. I don't think many others saw it coming either, but I could be wrong. So, the new setting book that they announced that it will be coming in November is the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. Now, if you're like me, you maybe have kind of heard of Ravnica. It sounds familiar, but it's a Magic the Gathering setting, actually. So, that was something that personally I didn't see coming. A lot of people have really been clamoring for, Dark Sun or Greyhawk or Planescape or something like that, Eberron. And here they say, here's the new setting, and it's Ravnica? So Magic the Gathering fans will probably be quite happy about this, and I imagine that one of the reasons that Wizards of the Coast is doing this is to perhaps draw some of that Magic the Gathering crowd into trying Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of them probably already play, but there is a huge player base for Magic the Gathering, much bigger than there is for than for Dungeons and Dragons, and Magic the Gathering makes a whole lot more money for Wizards of the Coast than Dungeons and Dragons does. So the past couple years with 5th edition, we have seen some growth and some resurgence. In fact, the CEO of Hasbro just announced today that Dungeons and Dragons had its most profitable year ever. And that's not entirely surprising if you just look around you. But this could certainly be a move that might draw more of the Magic the Gathering crowd into Dungeons and Dragons, and the cynical part of me wants to be a little upset about that. But I guess if we get a really cool setting book out of it, I shouldn't complain too much. And I think we should probably all withhold a bit of judgment and give it a fair shot. Still, there was part of me that was disappointed that they didn't announce Dark Sun or Planescape or something else. Although I will say, Eberron, which we'll talk about in a few, was one of my top choices. So that's some good news, at least. We'll get there. All right, but Ravnica, let's talk about it. Ravnica is a plane that is dominated by a city that covers an entire planet. The city is also called Ravnica, go figure. And it's a sprawling urban metropolis that covers the whole planet and dominates this plane. There are 10 guilds on Ravnica, hence the title Guildmaster's Guide. These 10 guilds make Ravnica a unique setting because they are the civic building blocks of the society, and they all have their own specific duty and specialty. They all have their own color combination of the various colors of magic. So I did a little bit of reading about the guilds, and they do sound really interesting. The setting does sound really cool. It's interesting that they're releasing a huge urban sprawling setting at the same time that we know we have a couple adventure books coming in Waterdeep, which is one of the biggest cities in Faerun and promises to provide a lot of urban adventure stuff. So anyway, I think that's kind of interesting. It shows kind of a focus in these next few months for Wizards of the Coast. And it certainly isn't a bad focus, and I think that the setting book will be pretty good. Still, I understand, and I felt a little bit of that disappointment that I'm sure many of you felt, that it wasn't one of the fan favorite older D&D settings that a lot of us want to see rekindled in the current edition. I'm sure that we will get some new races out of this book and possibly some new subclasses, and we will definitely get a new feature for the guilds that will actually replace the background feature in 5th edition. Your guild will say a whole lot about you as a character, and it can also be used by the DM. There will be guild-specific kind of plot hooks and NPCs and all sorts of adventure ideas. So I think that'll be really, really good too. It's definitely a more focused vision for what a Dungeons & Dragons game is in this setting, as opposed to Faerun, the Forgotten Realms, which is just this huge sandbox where anything is possible and pretty much anything goes. And personally, I kind of like more focused settings, so I think that'll be really cool, but we'll just have to wait and see how it turns out. All in all, I think it's a smart business move by Wizards of the Coast for sure, and hopefully hardcore fans and old-time fans of Dungeons & Dragons won't feel too burned by it. But it certainly seems like some are feeling that way. Next up, let's talk about a book that was released on Monday. Book, I'm doing the air quotes for the last time there. It is The Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron, and it is a PDF that they're kind of referring to as a document, not a book. So I don't know how many pages it is, but if you have the DM's Guild version, maybe you can let me know. I only have it on D&D Beyond, and there's no pagination in there. Overall, I've had a look at it, and it looks really good. Eberron is a setting that personally I was interested in because I usually play a more low fantasy, kind of gritty feeling setting, and this one is very different. Still gritty, still a bit of dark fantasy, but it's also very, they call it wide magic. In other words, magic is everywhere and it is just a part of people's daily lives. And it is also a setting where there's a lot of kind of moral ambiguity. It is described as a very pulpy noir setting, so there's a lot of room for those sorts of adventures. But at the same time, it's also described as a swashbuckling setting of high adventure. Overall, it just feels like a very kind of loud setting to me. Like, this is not a setting that is shy about what it is. It is in your face, it is wild, and it sounds like a really cool place to have some D&D adventures, and I'm sure some of you have experienced some of those. Personally, I've never played an Eberron, and I'm looking forward to it. A little history of Eberron in terms of how the setting was created. There was actually a contest back in 2002 that created this setting. D&D was asking for people to submit their settings, and the winner was Eberron. The winning entry was submitted by Keith Baker, and so he's written a lot of the books. He's written even some novels, I believe, in the Eberron setting, and he is heavily involved in this project as well. Now, I'm going to read this little bit from the intro here, which I think is interesting to give us a feel for what this PDF is in the minds of Wizards of the Coast. He says, "Bear in mind, this book presents my vision of Eberron. This is the world I run at my own table, and the way that I've converted its ideas to 5th edition rules. All of the material here is presented for playtesting and to spark your imagination. The game mechanics are in draft form, usable in your campaign, but not refined by final game design and editing. They aren't officially part of the game and aren't permitted in D&D Adventurers League events. If Wizards of the Coast decides to make this material official, it will be refined based on your feedback and then appear in a D&D book." So breaking news, guys, while I was editing this video, just sometime in the hour or so between me filming and getting to this point in editing, I went to get a screenshot of this text and found that it had changed. You can see that they are no longer mentioning that word playtest. I imagine some people felt burned by having to buy a playtest document, so they took that out. And they also mentioned that there is going to be free updates to this document, if it is updated. They also don't mention anything about Wizards of the Coast possibly putting out a book based on this someday, but I still imagine that is going to happen. This is kind of somewhere between Unearthed Arcana, and which is their kind of monthly articles for playtest material and new things they encourage people to try out, and an actual official D&D book. This is kind of like a step between, because we actually did see an Eberron Unearthed Arcana a while back, and those things are, you know, maybe 5, 10, 20 pages at most, but this is much more fleshed out and gives a lot more information and gets us closer to that full D&D book. It is being sold for $20, so that's, you know, I think that's reasonable for what you're getting as I've had a look at it. But if they're going to release a book in 9 months or so, 9 to 12 months, which I would guess it'll be 9 to 12 months. There, I'm putting my money on it, 9 to 12 months. If you're watching this 9 to 12 months from now, you let me know if I'm right. Then potentially you are actually buying a $20 PDF here, and then also spending $50 on a full book later. And, you know, I think if you really want to play an Eberron right now, you're going to want to pick this up. It is pretty cool. It seems like a pretty complete product as is. except for one thing that really bugged me, and that's the art. And I guess I don't blame them if they're releasing this as like a $20 PDF, but it's a lot of recycled art from previous editions, and I assume if they make a full book out of it, they will redo a lot of the art to make it in the 5th edition style, because you open this thing up and it looks like 3rd edition art, 4th edition art for sure. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about the actual contents of the book. Chapter 1 is all about what Eberron is. I've already kind of given you a basic feel for that. It's a setting with a very pulpy noir feel, and magic is very prevalent. Magic is almost studied like science in a way that people are using it to try to improve everyday lives. So magic is used for communication, for a lot of transportation, and all sorts of other things. And magic was also used in the war. They talk quite a bit about the last war, which is really akin to our Great War or World War I, the war to end all wars. It was a terribly devastating event that has had a huge impact on Eberron and has had a huge impact on the characters in Eberron. So that's useful in kind of forming a character background is, well, what did you do in the war? Or what do you remember of the war? Or how did it affect you or those around you? So I think that really is kind of a cool idea, this post-war setting, this world that is starting to come back to life after this awful, awful war. Chapter 2 gets into more detail about the setting and gets into specific regions and things like that. Chapter 3 gets into the races of Eberron, and there are quite a few new races, and the races that exist that were already in 5th edition are a little bit different in this, in terms of the role that they play in this setting and what humans or what elves and dwarves are like. Their history is totally different from that of the Forgotten Realms. So chapter 3 is all about races. So the races that are totally new in this setting are changelings, which are essentially shapeshifters. You've got Kalishtar, who are humans, but they are infused with these dream spirits that have changed them. You've got shifters, who are humans who have a kind of bestial aspect to them. They can kind of shift into a more animal-like state at some points. And of course, one of the most iconic beings in all of Eberron are the Warforged, and I think they're super cool. They're these previously mindless automatons who were improved upon to become sentient beings who could fully fight in the war, and they were used just as that for soldiers and for other purposes in the war, and after the war, given independence. So really cool. I really like the Warforged. And then of course you've got dwarves, gnomes, half-elves, half-orcs, halflings, and humans, and a bunch of other races too, all of whom are slightly different than they would be in traditional D&D 5e in Forgotten Realms here in Eberron. But for the most part, mechanically, these races are going to be the same as they are in the Player's Handbook. Chapter 4 is an entire chapter devoted to dragon marks, which are a really interesting aspect of Eberron. These are these strange magical marks that appear on the skins of certain individuals, usually at adolescence, and imbue them with certain powers. Now, the main houses of Eberron, these houses that are extremely powerful, are all people who have traditionally gotten these dragon marks. So chapter 4 talks about all of the different marks and what those give to the user or to the wearer, I don't know. And overall, I think dragon marks sound pretty interesting. I mean, it adds a cool flavor and also a mechanical bonus, which I really like. The last chapter, chapter 6, is Sharn, City of Towers. Sharn is the largest city in Eberron, and this goes into more depths and gives dungeon masters all sorts of tools they can use. It is a vertically oriented city that is just huge towers with the rich living at the top, the poor living at the bottom, and lots of stuff going on in between. It sounds like a really cool city, and chapter 6 does give information on Sharn-specific backgrounds that kind of, alter the backgrounds a little bit. They're still the same backgrounds you find in 5th edition Player's Handbook, but they give you some differences in flavor here for the city of Sharn. And there's also a whole lot of stuff to do for parties, different locations and regions, criminal activities, all sorts of stuff. If dungeon masters want to run a very planned adventure or a sandbox adventure, there are tools in this chapter for dungeon masters to do that in the city of Sharn. Dungeon Masters Chapter 6 is your friend. All in all, I think that the book is pretty well done. I think it is worth the $20 if you really want to play in Eberron, but if you're kind of lukewarm on it, maybe you wait until the full book comes out. I doubt they would be doing this if they didn't actually plan to release a full book. I don't think they'd be hinting at it in the way that they are if they didn't plan to release a book. So if you can't wait for that, it's probably coming eventually, but there is a lot of good stuff here to get you running with an Eberron game or campaign right now. So overall, it's been a really big week for Wizards of the Coast. Now, don't forget they do have 2 adventure books that are coming in September as well, both set in the city of Waterdeep. So overall, with the new announcements in the past few days from Wizards of the Coast, I would say that I am cautiously optimistic. I continue to feel pretty good about the stuff that Wizards of the Coast has been putting out for 5th edition so far, and I have faith that they will continue to deliver some really good things. I definitely understand a lot of the disappointment that might come, especially from some older DMs who really wanted to see some of their favorite settings, especially something like Greyhawk that hasn't really been touched since 2nd edition, to come back here in 5th edition. For me personally, I would love to see Dark Sun. I'm still kind of holding out hope for that, but Eberron, I think, is a really cool step in the right direction, and there's hope that we'll see a full book. And this Magic the Gathering setting, Ravnica, honestly, I don't think it's such a bad thing to try to draw some more Magic the Gathering players into this hobby. More people in this hobby, I think, is a good thing, and I can definitely see like a hardcore Magic the Gathering player saying, I've been thinking about running a game for some of my friends, and I could see this thing being the thing that pushes them over the edge in wanting to now actually do that. And I don't think that's such a bad thing. I also think that having a strong business model is really important for Dungeons and Dragons, for the future of this hobby, and I really like to see them doing well and succeeding. I think that these decisions are setting them up for success. There's still more I'd like to see, and we can all keep our fingers crossed that we'll see some of our favorite settings in the near future. But overall, I think we're headed in the right direction. I would love to hear from you as well. What do you think? Which one are you most excited about, and why? And what do you really still want to see from Wizards of the Coast for D&D 5th edition? As always, if you enjoyed this one, please leave it a like as well. Make sure you're subscribed. And if you want to be part of the awesome group of patrons who support this channel every month, even $1 or $2 a month can help a lot. You can check out the link in the video description to my Patreon page. I want to thank these patrons so much for their support, and I want to thank you all for watching this video and for hanging out with me. Everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.